ever burns down by itself. Every fire needs a little bit of help. Nothing ever burns down by itself. Every fire needs a little bit of help. Nothing ever burns down by itself. Every fire needs a little bit of...
On today's episode of From Embers, I share a conversation recorded with Ben Morea earlier this year, following an art show and talk he gave in Kingston, Ontario, entitled Revolutionary Animism, The Unified Field, Art, Politics, and Spirituality. A painter, rabble-rouser, and troublemaker, he was the main instigator of the Black Mask group, The Family, often described as a street gang with analysis and popularly known as Up Against the Wall Motherfucker, and the Armed Love communal movement. By the end of the 60s, facing increased police attention, Ben left New York and took to the high mountains of the American Southwest, living off-grid and participating in struggles for autonomy. Notably for anarchists, Ben and his comrades were among the first, if not the first, to popularize the concept of using an affinity group formation to carry out various direct actions. Some highlights of those actions include shutting down the MoMA, forcibly entering the Pentagon, occupying the Fillmore East and Columbia University, dumping the neglected garbage of the Lower East Side into the fountains of Lincoln Square, and cutting the fences at Woodstock, allowing thousands to enter for free. In this interview, Ben Morea recounts stories from his life, reflects on some of the challenges facing anarchists and revolutionaries of yesterday and today, and shares some thoughts on animism, indigenous ways of life, conflict, art, and more. Here's Ben. I know you're here doing a Canadian speaking tour, and so far you've done an event in Montreal and one here in Kingston just yesterday.
Yes.
What have those events been like?
No, they weren't very atypical. They were more what is traditionally happens. I mean, it's just, except that in different areas and different locations, people, they have a slightly different interest, a slightly different, like some focus more on art, some more on politics, some more on spirituality, some more on people that I was connected with or friendly with, like Valerie Solanas or Tim Leary. So it varies, which I enjoy. So that way I don't feel like I'm singing the same tune every night.
Can you talk about the term revolutionary animism and what it means to you?
Well, so we'll begin with the idea that animism is an understanding of the universe as a living entity and how we are part of that entity. And since animism can, in fact, be an individual choice and individual practice for self-advancement, gratitude, self-gratification. I hyphenated it to say revolutionary animism because, to me, animism is an essential item in the effort to change our society. So my purpose in illuminating animism is not for self-relief, but for societal relief. And so I use that term, revolutionary animism, to differentiate.
I wanted to ask you a bit about your time with the Black Panthers. I know you mentioned that Fred Hampton's assassination had a really big impact on you. I was curious if there were particular members of the Black Panther Party that you were closer to, either politically or otherwise.
No, I had a general sharing and appreciation. Certain ones I stood out in my mind as like Bobby Steele in particular. I always felt was a really a genuine element, an important. Like I really felt drawn to his clarity more, and there were some people in it that were not quite as genuine as him in a sense. There were some that were almost more showman or more interpersonal aggrandizement, but I felt he was really. But I was not personally involved with them as individuals as much.
That makes sense.
Like on occasion, they would come to New York, say. At that time, I was located in New York. And because of their notoriety, they could not carry weapons. They couldn't protect themselves. And there was some sense of conflict between them and black nationalists and between them and the government. You know, there's, but yet they could not be armed as separate. So we used to bodyguard for them in a sense. Like we would go to wherever they were speaking and we would carry weapons. But my feeling, and they understood that, and I think they appreciated it. My feeling was that I didn't want to be supportive of them in the sense of following, but I wanted to add and be an ally. Like I felt we had the same enemy at that time. And so we wanted to ally with them and fight the same enemy, not necessarily imitate them or ride their coattails. We wanted to fight the same enemy, but we were both in need of that.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning.
So we weren't just supporting them. We were allies in the struggle. I felt, they felt, we felt.
Yeah, I mean, New York. I'm definitely gonna ask a bunch of questions about different relationships that you had or people you knew then, because it's a pretty interesting history for me. Which you mentioned you were friends.
Yeah, I'm listening.
With Valerie Solanas.
Close friends.
Yeah, what was that like?
It was great. I mean, she was a really good friend. I was very fond of her, as a person. I've even said, I loved her. Not in a romantic sense, but I just really liked her so much to be around with her, and I felt she was a really had a lot to offer, and I just enjoyed her company, so to speak. And she was partially homeless a lot, and she always understood that my home, there was an opening there for her anytime she needed. And so she could come and go. Like there was no sense of commitment, or it was just anytime you need it, there's a place for you here.
That's special.
And one interesting thing, one night we were just sitting around drinking tea or coffee, and I said to her, Valerie, your whole program is about killing men, cutting up men. And you're always around with me, and I'm a man. How is that? And she looked at me with this quizzical look of God, I never really thought of it that way. Like puzzled, almost. And then she looked at me and she said, I promise you will be the last man we kill. And that's the kind of humor she had. That's why I liked her so much. I mean, it's not
Yeah,
a typical response.
for sure. Did you guys share kind of a perspective on the art world, or like was that part of your
Yeah,
friendship?
yes. And we shared, our feelings about the Warhol trip. Like, we both had a negative feeling toward it, that it was using people, that it was not genuine. It was, in some ways, harmful, like, to the arts. Like, it was this sense of, like, the superstar was, like, to us, was a mistake. Art doesn't need a superstar. It doesn't have a superstar. Art itself is the star. And those who want to be stars, they just only are hurting the world of creativity. Creativity is not a star path. Creativity is a life path. And we both had a negative feeling about, and I don't know what part, but that contributed some part, I'm sure, to her shooting him.
How did you feel about that? I don't know if you remember your reaction at the time.
Somebody had asked me this one time that was doing a newspaper interview, and I said, well, in truth, I loved Valerie and I detested Andy. But I didn't want him shot, but I said, I made it clear. But I really had a negative feeling toward him and dislike for him, for what he represented, and the opposite toward her. I loved what she represented, and I loved her.
I was curious because I was reading some articles and stuff and read about, like, I don't know if it was Black Mask or the motherfuckers, quote unquote, who, like, were doing that, but that people staged an assassination of Kenneth Koch.
Yes, that was Black Mask.
Okay, interesting. What were some of the ripple effects of that afterwards, or like, how did that kind of? What was that like?
There were no physical ripples, so to speak, but a lot of people understood how much we opposed the commodification of art and the gentrification of it and the elitism of it. They understood that's what we were opposed to. Not poetry, but the use of poetry as a gentrifying and elitist, hierarchical. And that's why we staged the assassination of him with blanks to make it, and to show that our disdain for that level of, but poetry itself, like I was friends with Allen Ginsberg, and I really liked Allen a lot. So it wasn't poetry that we objected to at all. It was the bourgeois poet, the poet of gentrification, the poet of this society is good, rather than the poet that had questions about the society.
I am curious, when did you know Timothy Leary, and what did you think of him?
I probably got acquainted with him around 64. And I liked him as a person very much. I questioned some of his desire to be like guru-ish. But I felt, in all honesty, I felt that the effort to change this society was not only difficult, but extremely difficult. And I felt that every effort would help. And I felt that somehow he was able to bring to young people some need to break from the bourgeois society, from the culture, the society that we all detested. And he gave an impetus to that break. And we objected to people who dosed, who used LSD with people without them knowing, like on the West Coast. Like I also knew Ken Kesey and those people. I knew them. And we objected very strongly to that idea of dosing people. Having LSD given to them without their knowledge. We felt that was criminal almost. And I sided, and Tim also felt that way, and I sided with him very strongly against Kesey and the acid test consciousness of the West Coast. I was also friends with Owsley, who was the master chemist in America. And when he one time I met with him, he said he had just made what was known as sunshine. And he said this was the best he ever made, and I took some. But at some point I felt that the danger of LSD was too apparent, and I leaned towards psychotropics more, natural substances, if people wanted to find some way to change, to rewire. This society is so dictatorial. I mean, people, brainwashing is an understatement. People in this society are completely fabricated. And I felt that substances can help rewire. And at some point, I rejected the use of chemicals because I thought that was also too much a part of society, of this. And natural substances, I felt, had more possibility and more usability, and could really help change society. And historically, people around the world, both indigenous and post-indigenous, they use substances and to help them break from the norm. And I felt that was useful.
Yeah, I know you've talked about this a lot, so maybe you're sick of talking about it. But I know the garbage strike in New York City was a big deal at the time, like to your group, artistically, politically, and like neighborhood life, all of that. And I recently read that Black Mask was involved in debates about like how to respond to that garbage strike in terms of like community cleanup or like a more militant thing or both or something. I guess I'm just like, that was interesting to me. And I'm curious about what that debate was like and then how you guys decided to do the action that you did.
Yeah. Well, historically, the garbage strike happened at a time when actually Black Mask was transitioning to Up Against the Wall. Like Black Mask had been really just a few of us, and it was an attempt to bring together art and politics, following the lead of Dada, Surrealism, and more and more, it attracted more and more people, many like street people and militants, a lot of guerrilla theater people. The group was really growing exponentially. And the garbage strike happened right about that time. And what we felt, like in the Lower East Side, garbage had reached the height of 15, 20 feet.
That's huge.
Huge. But in the wealthy areas of New York, there was no garbage like that because they had private corridors. So what we felt is they were being deprived of garbage. And we thought, well, we could help. We bring garbage to them. So we put together an effort to bring garbage up to Lincoln Center, which was the temple of culture. White culture. And we put out a leaflet saying this was a cultural exchange, garbage for garbage, implying that what they were producing was another form of garbage. And since we didn't have a name really as a group because it had been just transitioning from Black Mask to Up Against the Wall, we didn't have a name. And I had been friends with Leroy Jones, Amir Baraka, and he had written a poem that said Up Against the Wall. Can you say that word on the radio that I'm with?
Yeah, you can just say it. I'll edit it if I need to.
He had written a poem that used the line, "Up against the wall, motherfucker." And I used that on the bottom of the leaflet, not as a name, but as a salutation, like a revolutionary exclamation, up against the wall. And so people, when they saw it there, they took it as a name, and so we were actually then, from then on, known as that. We never called ourselves that. We always called ourselves the family.
Interesting. Were there other groups or other people at the time saying like different things about the garbage strike or how people should do it?
Yeah, there was some more liberal groups like helping to clean up the garbage on the Lower East Side, which, we rejected totally. We thought it would be better to take the garbage up to where the society and the wealthy inhabited and make a point. Like, we believed in the idea of the propaganda of the deed. Like, if you want to get across a thought, do something that shows that thought rather than saying the thought alone in words. So we thought that would show our disdain for this culture, but the importance of.
Also read like a brief comment that your group participated in a student occupation at Columbia University.
Columbia, yeah.
What was that like?
Well, it originated. See, Columbia University was a really wealthy real estate entity as well as a university. And they wanted parts of Harlem to develop and evict the black tenants of that area. And originally, the first where the black students objected to that and started a demonstration and started different occupational moves to object to what was going on, that Columbia was going to evict the tenants of an area which had a racial implication because they were all black, and replace it with a wealthy white corporate scholastic entity. And so then at that time, SDS, which was strong at Columbia, supported them and got involved with them. So the black students had occupied one building, and SDS allied with them and occupied several more. And we were a nominal chapter in SDS, which we had no desire to be part of SDS, but we were there to help them. They were in conflict with Progressive Labor, which was a Stalinist, Maoist, Stalinist group that was trying to take over SDS. So we wanted to help them resist that. And we also wanted to bring another thought pattern to these young students other than the normal political discourse of the Marxists. So we were a nominal chapter, but not in the sense of wanting to be a chapter. Anyway, they contacted us and told us what was going on and said there was one building left. There were 4 taken, and there was one left. And they asked if we were interested in occupying it, taking it, and we were. So we did. And so we occupied the 5th building. And it was what was nominally the math building. Except we completely booby-trapped and fortified the building. So at the point when the police evicted all the buildings, they didn't evict our building. They wouldn't even enter it. We invited them. We said, come take us out. Like he took they were violent with everybody as they took them out of buildings. And so we told them, come and take us out. And it was so booby-trapped and fortified that they wouldn't even attempt it. So they tried to communicate with us and make a deal and some kind of solution other than eviction. But to us, it was important to be part of that struggle, to ally both with the black students and with the other student, the SDS.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And since we had talked about Valerie a little while ago, and you understand how much I really liked her, respected her, she actually came up to Columbia. And the building was surrounded by police. You couldn't get in or out. All these buildings, they were. But somehow she got in. And she came to the math building where we were. And she saw me. She said, hey, Ben, I came to see you. I wanted to know what would happen if I shot somebody. I said, well, it depends on 2 things. Who you shoot and if they die or not. She said, oh, okay, good. And she laughed. And a week later, she shot Andy Warhol.
That's quite the conversation. Damn. I like that happened at a student occupation. That's funny.
Yeah. That's why I mentioned I thought it was really interesting.
Yeah. But I was going to ask you if you could talk a bit about the relationship between the SDS and the motherfuckers. Like, do you feel like you were mostly on the same team or mostly annoyed each other or something else entirely? Or, like, what was that like?
Well, we were on the same team in a sense, but very dissimilar. I mean, our objective was not the same as their objective. We actually were very negative and skeptical about students in general. We felt like we needed people willing to change society, to fight. And to study it was not our goal, but we liked them. A lot of them stayed with us, and a lot of them were really influenced by us. And some of them became weathermen. The weathermen grew up out of that mixture. A lot. Of SDS and the motherfuckers. And they went some direction that a lot of us felt was the wrong direction, but they were initiated by that confluence of students and the motherfuckers. In fact, a lot of them stayed with us quite often and around with us and did things with us. We did demonstrations together, and we planned different things together, occupations and efforts.
I recently listened to this podcast with Zane Dorn, like the son of Bernadine Dorn and Bill Ayers, and I just remember thinking it was like interesting to hear about another side of those folks from like a different perspective than the like purely political or something. Like hearing from their kid was more about like their whole lives and themselves as people.
Yeah.
Which I guess maybe part of where I'm going with that is that I know that you mentioned caring for like 40 kids in Colorado when you were living off the grid. And yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, how your anti-authoritarian ideas or your, like, politics around the world or, like, hierarchy and stuff played into, like how you felt about parenting in a sense, or, like, yeah, if you had, like, reflections on that.
Yeah, well, we always felt strongly that young people were our hope. That was the future. And we believed in the sense of the relay. Like we had to pass something on to the younger generations. And we cared for them, those that had different life problems foisted on them by society. At that time, it started in Lower East Side. We took in kids, but it was a small amount. Like one in particular, a friend of mine, or a part of the struggle, the movement, was in prison. A Puerto Rican, he was in prison, and this wife was taking care of the child, and she was around with us, one time I was on the street, and somebody came running and said that she had just been arrested and taken away. And I said, what about the child? I think it was a little girl. And I think at that time, I can't be, I'm not exactly sure, but I think she was around maybe 4 years old. No, I'm sorry. 4 months old or 5 months old. And I got really panicked. I said, what about the baby? And they said, we don't know. They just took her, the mother. So I went back to their apartment, and the door was unlocked. I went in, and the baby was there. So I took the baby, and I got a backpack, and I made like a sling, and I carried that child around for, I don't know, maybe several months. At some point, some family, they really were into having a child, and they couldn't have it, and they wanted to. I said yes. I didn't want anything to happen to the baby on my back because my life was so precarious. So, but that was the beginning of, and then we'd find kids like runaways, 11, 12 years old, in the hallway sleeping, and we got created a fund, and we got what we called crash pads. We rented, and so we would send kids there. We tell them there's a place you could stay. Don't stay in the hallway. It's dangerous. And so we had 4 or 5 crash pads, and so kids, runaways, 10, 11, 12 would have a place to stay that was relatively safe, and they could stay with each other and help each other and protect each other. Because it was a rough area, at that time, the Lower East Side. It was what people call a ghetto or a slum. And so they'd be safe. And some of them became really close to us, and we kind of almost adopted them, and some of them grew, followed the militancy that we had. They started to replicate that or think that way. But then when we went off the grid in a rural setting out west, I was around reservations a lot, indigenous reservations is where I went to learn and to share with Native people, indigenous people, who I felt had the key to a lot of what we hoped. I thought they had a superior understanding of the universe and society than the invading culture, which I felt was far inferior. The invading force. It's ironic because the people who conquered them called them savages, but actually the people who conquered them were way more savage. Anyway, so being on the reservations and making relatives and friends with the Native people, some of the kids needed help, like they came from alcoholic families. So it began this whole idea of taking and helping children. And my companion and I actually, I always say, raised about 40 children. Not for their whole life. Some for their whole life. Some for a few years. Some for a year or less even. Depending on what their need was. But to give them another view, another possibility in life out of the alcoholic. But it started with taking that first child off the street.
Yeah, it's cool to hear about different ways that people create family or like care for each other or whatever ways outside of like, you know, the
and
nuclear family,
that's what
whatever.
anarchism is, to care about the fellow man, try to find a way to liberate our fellow man. Whereas Marxism is the exact opposite. The attempt is to organize man and control man bureaucratically. So it was the right way of thinking for us as anarchists, is to like try to share a free life with these kids.
I'm curious what you think about the role of the militant as like something that can become like a specialized role, or like that idea from Freddie Perlman, I think, about like the armor that we put on to fight and then it becomes like hard to remove and it changes you. Like I know you've been speaking about the concept of like the warrior and how that has stayed with you and changed over the years. And like, yeah, I guess for lots of people it becomes destructive. For other people it doesn't. I just wondered if you had any stories about that or like reflections that you wanted to share.
It's a necessary role in my way of thinking. It's not necessary that everybody become a warrior. Like the struggle needs all of us. It needs the school teacher, the poet, the artist, the warrior, the fighter, the militant. In order to change this monster that we're surrounded with, it's going to be really hard to change. It's going to take all of us. It can't. The militants alone cannot do it. And I don't think it would be beneficial if it was only militants that did it. We would just end up with another dictatorship. But we're all needed to change this oppressive way of life into something real, human, beneficial. Like, ironically, the people that were on this continent before the invasion of the Anglo and European, they were closer to what is real as a living entity. They respected the earth. They respected the environment. They felt part of it. They understood they were part of it. It was something so beautiful. And along coming an invader that was the opposite, that didn't respect it, that eventually, like to this moment, right now, it's a threat to it. This invading culture is an invasive culture that the potential for destroying this earth is so close now because of that change, what they brought with them, that way of thinking, that money is what's important, that capitalism is, and but in order to change that, it's so widespread. It's from from every element of this society is controlled, and it's going to take so much to change it. So you need more than the militant.
Why do you think that is? Like, if you only have militants, you end up with another dictatorship or whatever.
Because
like,
that's all they know. What a warrior knows is fighting. If you only have fighters, then that's going to be what the society is. But if you have all of society, all of the community with you, so the effort is to bring everybody together to change this, to elucidate the need for change, to live it. To me, like, right, I always say revolution is not an event. That's what the Marxists think. We're fighting for the revolution. It's an event. It's not an event. Revolution is a way of life. It's a way of thinking. It's a belief in freedom, in life itself, the preciousness of it. And so if you only have one segment fighting, then that segment becomes...
I feel like I think I understand what you're saying, but for me it also is hard to put together with some of the things you've been saying before about how anarchism or how freedom was about like your whole life more than just like one specific political struggle. It was about like everything altogether. I guess I just feel like there's militants, as in people who that's all or most of what they do or something, but I don't know if that's most people's experience of militancy or something. I think like a lot of people like fight sometimes or in certain situations and like, but their life is bigger than that too.
Which is great. I'm totally think that's the correct way to be. But there's also a certain condescension toward those that, like poets, artists, they're an important part of it, and I'm sure they're part-time involved with the struggle to change, and that's great. All I was inferring is that if you have only the fighter,
sure.
But I'm not against having the fighters. Like I'm not
For
saying.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, we need that very much, more than ever now. But at the same time, we can't reject those that are not willing to go as far as us. There's this condescension that these people aren't going as far as we are. But they have something to offer. It's a hierarchical approach to revolution. There's only certain people are more important, or certain people have more valor, or certain people are more revolutionary. But that's a dangerous way of thinking. We need to bring everybody to that conclusion that this thing that we have around us has to be replaced, has to be changed. And it's going to take a lot of us. It's like, say, the war in Vietnam, to go back to one of the earlier questions. When we started fighting against the war in Vietnam, like we felt, my group and my contemporaries, we felt that this war was being waged in our name, and we could not allow it to continue. We said, it's going to stop or we're going to die stopping it. That's how we felt. It had to. In the beginning, 80% of the American population was in favor of the war in Vietnam. Only 20% was against it. At the time it ended, 80% of the population was against it. That's the effort, and it took lives. People, brothers of mine, relatives of mine died to make that change. But it changed, and the war did end. And when we first said that, we're going to stop it, or we're going to... No, people laughed. How are you going to stop it in America, this monster? But we stopped it. But it took all of us. It wasn't just one group. It wasn't just SDS or just the motherfuckers. They all contributed something. The weathermen, the motherfucker. It's a major effort is needed.
I mean, it feels super relevant right now also with like various wars and conflicts going on. And I don't know. That's not really a question. It's just something like I feel like anarchists of my generation were not really, maybe in my context or something, we're not super involved with the anti-war movement. Like, or more
But
felt
that,
like...
right, stop right there for a minute. Anti-war, which war? I'm not anti-war. I'm anti-unjust war.
Totally.
I'm anti-war of occupation, war of extermination. But I'm not against war of defense.
Yeah.
At all. I'm not against a war that people wage to be free. That the concept of just saying anti-war is an illusion. You can't be anti-war. You have to be anti-war if the war is one of captivity. But if the war is one of freeing people, you can't be against it. It's entirely different. So I never use the term anti-war because I'm not anti-war. I'm anti-war to those wars that are detrimental to humanity. But I'm pro-war for those that are free humanity. So you can't go around and say, hey, I'm pro-war. I mean, but so I think of everything in relative terms. So when you say war, then relatively speaking, which war is out to help humanity and which war is out to destroy it? That's where relativity comes in. But it's gone today.
What do you mean by that?
The ability to make a choice, be able to see the difference. Like, say, in the beginning, Al-Qaeda was out to force Russia out of Afghanistan. So they were actually in the good side. And then it became some other entity. It became a terrorist. But in the beginning, it was good. I support, like, say, the war in the effort in Cuba. The people in the mountains. Castro was in the mountains, sure, and other marches, but there were anarchists, there were Trotskyists, there were extreme left socialists in the mountains, and they were out to destroy Batista and the puppet of America. So I supported it 100%. But I don't mean I support Castro's eventual dictatorship, but I supported the effort to overthrow Batista. So that's what relativity is. You have to pick. Like at that moment, I was for the people in the mountains. I wanted them to win, and they did. But that don't mean I wanted the eventuality of a Castro dictatorship. So relativity means your ability to choose and to see the overlap or see the difference. Like I was pro-Al-Qaeda when they were out to drive Russia out of Afghanistan. When the Mujahideen, I was pro-Mujahideen. But then when it became another entity, so that's where relativity is important. Like I was pro-Hezbollah, but when they helped Syria defeat the Free Syrian Army, then I realized that was another problem. They were not out to free people. So, relatively, you have to look at and decide each, and that changes. It doesn't mean it remains forever. So those who defeated Batista don't remain the good guys in my mind forever. They were the good guys for while they were doing that. But when they became another new dictatorship in Cuba, it changed. And so I changed my view of them. That's what relativity is.
In terms of like relationships between like people in the family, in the motherfuckers, I feel like it can be a common experience of revolutionaries or radicals or whatever, that when there's like a lot of things going on politically or just like a lot of activity, people find ways to work together or like deal with their conflicts, or sort of not let their conflicts get in the way of doing things they think are important, kind of thing. But that's not always the case. Like sometimes when things die down a bit, then all those conflicts that people put aside sort of come back to the surface. I don't know. I'm just curious, like, does that resonate with your experiences, or like, and also how did you deal with conflict among your friends and comrades?
Well, there's two ways. Like the first, it's very much like Native people. Like they lived and occupied a certain area, and they worked together as a tribe. Very rarely, but occasionally, some difference would come up between one group in the tribe and another group. And rather than fight each other and kill each other, one group would move some away. So that's one response. Obviously, another response is to try to work it out. And what happened in our family, I call it the Pancho Villa syndrome. And because it happened all around the world, not just to us. And when it happened in Mexico, like there was a revolution, there was a struggle, but when that subsided and or had a partial solution that wasn't satisfactory to all of the elements fighting it, there was a conflict, and that they broke apart from each other, the groups. And one group, like namely around Pancho Villa, they went back to criminality. They went back to banditry. And that happened around Machno, when they were defeated by Lenin. One group went back to banditry. It happened in Spain. It happened everywhere in Brazil. The Maroons, when that subsided or ended, one group turned to banditry again. Because you have armed warriors. And when the struggle, which is an ideal, changes or ends, what do? They're armed. They don't become dentists. So they turned to, and it happened in my family. And we lost more people, their lives, in that part of the struggle. Like my own brother was killed in that part of the struggle. I know of at least 10 people that died in that part of where switched to banditry part, and some group didn't, stayed. Like in shootouts with the state police or with each other, or not against each other, but within their group. Like, so within the bandit groups, sometimes they would fight over spoils of war. So but I think retaining the goal before you. Like seeing that, okay, the revolution has faltered for a while, but we're still revolutionary. We still want to see a change in society. So we have to change our tactics. We have to slow down, wait to rebuild. And this other group didn't wait. They turned to banditry. So that's a problem, yes. But it's something we have to deal with. It's something we come to find a way to overcome. And so like some of us found another way, and that's where animism arose. Find another understanding that'll help us to continue the struggle to change the society. Animism will help us change what we have here. So when instead of turning to banditry, I turned toward animism to understand here's another tool that can help us. So you have to keep the goal ahead of you. Like the goal is to change the society. If it's not going to be able to do it at that moment revolutionary-wise, you can't turn to banditry. You have to find another way to attain the same goal, change. So I went to try to learn more from Native people about what that animistic, indigenous people, like what that animistic, how can that help us? How can that help unify us? How can we find another addition to the goal? And I feel that's what saved me. Rather than giving up the struggle to change society, I had to find another tool that could help to change society. And so that gave me another focus. And it's it's not easy to be in that conflict, that your whole life is dedicated to this struggle, and all of a sudden that's over. And here you are, like ready to die, armed, and it all changes. How do you resist using that in a negative way? Mm-hmm. So that's where each individual, that's where that relativity comes. Each individual makes a choice. I'm not going to become a bandit. And it's heartbreaking in a lot of ways to see your comrades that you were fighting with to change society turn to something that you feel is a negative. It's heartbreaking. But it's just, it happened everywhere in the world. There was a struggle to change. Anti-colonial forces, revolutionary forces. It was everywhere where that stopped or failed or had a break or some form of banditry came in, or some form of nationalistic hatred comes in, or something replaces the goal of revolution. And that something could be very negative, but you have to keep going with this focus that we're going to. So it took 30 or 40 years for that. When I saw things in the 70s changing, I knew it was going to come back. But it took a long time before people started. So then by the 80s, you could feel that it was starting to percolate a little, and 90s. Like right now, it's ready again. And then the added things come in, like the environmental struggle all of a sudden came in. And that gives a new impetus there's a new topic, a new understanding that this society that we have is about to destroy the earth. That'll wake you up and realign you with the struggle.
Were there, I feel like there's so many, like, anarchists have to really work at honing their capacities for certain things, including, I think, like, looking at the world and, like, history and also how things are in other places and your own place and all that stuff, like, which is why I appreciate, like, hearing this stuff from you, because it's like you've clearly just been paying attention to the world and seeing things change and whatever. Were there, like, when you were in Colorado, do you remember what, like, were there specific, like, moments or, like, events that happened that kind of, like, sparked that understanding of, like, oh yeah, that's building again, or something is going on? Like,
but actually, yes, but actually, I had that feeling before I went to Colorado.
okay.
I had this sense that I could feel that the struggle could not continue alone the way it was. There was something missing. And so I was trying to understand it. And I really felt that indigenous people, not only Native American, but all indigenous, had some clue that we had to reinvent, like, or reclaim, or accept this. But I couldn't completely understand it. But when two things happened, the struggle, like, had a break, downtime, like, all of a sudden it wasn't going to happen right away. Like the counter-revolution, the Reagan counter-revolution was one thing that helped stop it, and the other was the government's assassination program. They assassinated Fred Hampton. They assassinated Malcolm X. They assassinated people that were trying to bring together the races. No, very few. I've never heard anybody really talk about it, understand it. That all of those people that were assassinated had one thing in common. They were trying to bring the races together to struggle together. Like Malcolm, when he was just a Muslim, he was not accepted by the government, obviously. But the minute he said, there's something, we can't reject the white race. We have to find a way to become allied to this. And once that's when they killed him. Fred Hampton did the same thing. He said we need to, so he allied with the Young Patriots, which is a white group. I was with them. I was with the Young Patriots when I could see that happening. We were in Chicago. We met with them. That's when they killed him. And I had a friend, Sam Melville, that was part of the Attica Uprising, the first major prison break in America. And they assassinated him. He wasn't killed in the yard, in the fight. They shot him off the roof. They targeted him because he was bringing together black and white. And when they went after me and they put me on the assassination chart, it was because I was really working to bring the races together, to fight together. It was the one common denominator in all of these people that they really were fearful of. That's what America feared the most. Not the individual revolutionary, the individual, they could handle that, they felt. But when those who tried to bring together the races to fight together, they were all taken out. So I began to realize how important that was. That's even more important to bring the race. So I wanted to see what the indigenous people, how that could benefit us, that understanding.
Well, thank you very much for speaking with me and
Thank you
being on the show.
for inviting me, for allowing me to share with you. Thank you.
The Anarchist.
Radio
Berlin.
From across the pond.
It's the Anarchist Radio Berlin.
With audios in English, Spanish and German.
And please,
don't mention the war.
You can find us at channelzeronetwork.com and aradio-berlin.org.